Good morning. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Joseph. Good morning.
Okay,
We are
bonjour.
live
Bonjour,
we are already live up until 12.
Good morning.
Serial, one question. Are you managing the slides?
I do.
Okay, good.
Good afternoon and welcome to this new webinar from ERA, the European Union Agency for Railways. I'm Cyril Martin, Communication Officer, and I will be your moderator today. I'm very honored to host this first webinar of 2023. And to begin with, I would like to take this opportunity to wish you and all those close to you a very happy new year. So today's webinar will be divided into two parts. Firstly, the Executive Director of ERA, Josef Doppelbauer, will present the objectives and new activities of the agency for 2023. We will then have the pleasure to have with us Clio Liégeois, the head of the department in charge of railway regulation at the Belgium Ministry of Mobility and Transport, being with us today as the chair of the management board of ERA. After Clio, we will listen to Christopher Carr, the head of the new operational data unit. He will introduce the new strategy of the agency regarding data. Then, in the second part of this webinar, we will put a spotlight on the report Cross-Border Rail Transport Potential, published last December by the agency. Torben, Holvad and Francesco Rotoli from the agency will comment this report. In this regard, we will have the pleasure to have with us Enno Wiebe, Technical Director of CER, and Bardo Schettini Gherardini, Director Operations at EIM. Thanks to all of you for being with us here today. Before I give the floor to Josef Doppelbauer, I'd like to remind you that, as usual, you are most welcome to ask questions to our speakers using the chat function, which you will find at the top right-hand corner of your screen. You can also tag questions from other attendees which you judge valuable by clicking the sub icon. We will do our best to reply to the greatest number of questions at the end of this webinar. A last word to say that, as usual, this event is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel and our new website shortly after the end of this event. Without further ado, I will now give the floor to the Executive Director of ERA, Josef Doppelbauer. Please, Josef, the floor is yours.
Many thanks, Cyril, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the first webinar of ERA in 2023. And I would like to start with the most important task that the entire railway community will have in the future. And this is to continue our drive for the transformation of the European transportation system. And this transformation in particular means a modal shift to rail. As the figures on the slide show, rail is the most sustainable mode of transport, and the modal shift to rail, therefore, is the key aspect of meeting the ambitious decarbonization targets for transport as per the European Green Deal. The two key advantages of rail are, of course, the low friction at the wheel-rail interface and the economies of scale through the bundling of traffic. If we go to the next slide, there you see that in relation to other transport modes, the CO2 or greenhouse gas emissions from transport, and these are the latest available figures from the statistical pocketbook 22, rail is contributing only 0.4%, whereas the contribution of road to the greenhouse gas emission is almost 77%. So the objective and the priority clearly is not to make rail more climate friendly, but to make the EU transport system as such more sustainable, more climate neutral, and that means modal shift to rail. If we go to the next slide, we see that unfortunately the political objectives of modal shift, and here I show the figures for freight. Already in 2011, there was a target to achieve a 30% modal share of rail freight by 2030. And this target was renewed in 2018. However, in reality, the modal share of rail, and here I'm referring to freight, but the situation for passenger rail is very similar. The modal share has been stable, and if we look even more carefully, the modal share has gone down, was slightly declining. And as the carbon crisis and the climate change is imminent, the timing of measures is important. The earlier the effect, the better it is for the environment. Or in other words, if we continue the trend to stay stable, in 2029, it will be very difficult to achieve a drastic change of the modal share. We know that the modal share of rail, unfortunately, is low across the European Union, but it is even significantly lower across borders. And this is why in the second part of this webinar, Torben and Francesco will present our cross-border study, where they will, on the one hand, identify some critical issues, but also propose solutions. And if we go to the next slide, Cyril, I just highlight that the key issue is that while for long distances, rail should be superior than road, unfortunately, on every border crossing, we add delays and we add cost. And on the right-hand side of this slide, you see the menu of issues that will be explained in more detail by Francesco and Torben. The European Union Agency for Railways, of course, has as an objective to help building the single European railway area. And on the next slide, you see the situation with the agency as being the European authority for authorizing vehicles, for giving single safety certificates to railway undertakings, and also for ERTMS trackside approvals. As per the end of December 2022, we have delivered 4,400 decisions for vehicle authorization. Of course, the majority, 4,086 of these decisions, is for conformity to type, but there is almost 400 other, we call it complicated decisions for vehicle authorization. And we have authorized 47,600 vehicles. In other words, by the end of February, we will reach 50,000 vehicles authorized by ERA, and we will possibly plan an event celebrating the 50,000th vehicle authorized by the agency. Safety certificates, 131. Currently, we are at 135, so we have already been busy in 23 as well. And 4 ERTMS trackside approvals. So this shows that the agency is becoming a major contributor to reducing the difficulties for European rail. And this is also reflected in our work program. If we can go to the next slide. And on the next slide, you see the key objectives of the programming period 2023 to 2025. Of course, we have on the one hand the authority activities, and there we will of course make sure that we continue our path to make these authorizations and certifications as efficient as possible and as best understood by the sector and by the applicants as possible. On the other side, we have, of course, policy tasks that the agency carries out in close cooperation and coordination with the European Commission, with the Directorate General for MOVE. And on the next slide, Cyril, we then see the highlights in 23, where we have several key elements. The first is related to what I just said. It's the further process improvement in the authorization and certification. Key element will be to forecast the volume of application as best as possible. And we are also proceeding to improve the one-stop shop. Then we finally hope to achieve the vote on the TSI package 2022-23, but a key focus will be the cleaning up of national rules, both for vehicle authorization and national safety rules. On data and digitalization, we have started the year with creating a new unit on operational data management, and Chris Carr will shortly introduce the objectives of this new unit. And the second pillar in terms of contents, and actually it should come first, is safety. And we, of course, continue our activities for safety culture. In all of these activities, of course, it is important to cooperate with the stakeholders, and the stakeholders are represented in our management board. And at this stage, I invite the chair of our management board, Ms. Clio Liégeois, to give us the highlights for next year from the perspective of the management board. Clio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Josef, for your kind invitation today. It's a pleasure to be with you to actively participate in this first webinar of the agency. So as you said, I'm representing today the Agency Management Board. And of course, we strongly believe in supporting the agency in all of your actions and of course in 2023 as well. And this was the opportunity for me to underline that for the management board, the tool that we use to support the agency is what we call the single programming document. It's the work program of the agency, really, and we adopt it year after year. And this time in 2023, the new thing is that we have integrated in this SPD, in the work program, a strengthening action plan. And this is because we think that the agency is met with a challenge, which is to deploy a too limited number of posts as compared to the agency's need to cope with the pressure from both the policy on the one hand and the authority tasks on the other hand. Because as you have shown in your previous slide, these are the two circles you have underlined, the two pillars on which the agency has to work, and the management board is very conscious that you need the proper resources to do both. And this is why the strengthening plan, the strengthening action plan, has for objective to ensure that the agency has the right level of resources to perform the most adding value activities in an effective, efficient manner, and of course in line with our ambition level for the agency's activities. This means that, in fact, there is a very difficult task for the management board, which is prioritization. So we need to prioritize between the agency's tasks in order to decide on the basis of an arbitration, really, what can be done with the available resources and what should be probably postponed then. So what we try to do is focusing on multi-annual planning, and of course allocating the proper resources in the most efficient manner based on what we hope is the best value for money for the EU citizens and the rail sector in general. In the strengthening action plan, we have agreed with the agency to focus on 3 areas, which is first the budget execution, which means that by the end of 2022, in fact, the agency colleagues were able to really use almost 100% of the budget that was allocated. And that is a great success, really, because we are faced with many challenges related, for instance, with COVID. But still, I think that's a very great success, and we want to continue with that in 2023, and the management board will certainly monitor that. And then we want to work on the level of overheads, which means that we must look at the agency staff and make sure that we allocate them to the most important, the priorities, the most important tasks. And then finally, we want to really advocate for an increase of the resources which are deployed on the policy work, for which we will need the support from the European Commission, of course. And so the management board, in which the European Commission is actively participating, will continue to support the agency in 2023 with this regard. This is the end of my intervention. I want to give back the floor to Cyrielle, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak today. Thank you.
Well,
thank you very much. Yep.
Actually,
Josef, please.
Still have one slide as a transition to the second part of the webinar, and this should express the commitment of the agency to work together with the sector. Our motto has been for a long time, with the sector, for the sector, and the presence of sector representatives, Bardo and Enno, together with the chair of a management board, underlines that together with the sector, we want to contribute to build the knowledge in order to have the basis to achieve the necessary outcomes, to drive the regulation in cooperation with the European Commission, to share knowledge. And this is extremely important to make sure that the knowledge on the EU legislation and the knowledge on the processes of the 4 railway package is appropriately shared. And on the other hand, we have, of course, a task to monitor the actual status of our outcomes, and to understand the difficulties of the sector. And with this commitment to cooperation, we want to enter a challenging year 2023 with challenging tasks ahead. And as the chair of our management board has outlined, of course, also the challenge in terms of resources and budget. And I thank the sector and all our stakeholders for their trust. And with that, I hand back to Cyril to introduce the second part of our webinar with Chris Carr as the first speaker.
Thanks a lot, Joseph, and thanks again to Clio for being with us today. I will now then give the floor to Christopher Carr, the head of the new Operational Data Unit, OPD, who will introduce the new strategy of the agency regarding data. Please, Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cyril. I think if we can move directly to the next slide. Thank you. So just a couple of slides on what we're trying to achieve with the Operational Data Unit. I think all of us can accept that in this world that we live in today, the exchange of data and information becomes a central part of how we support an effective and sustainable railway system. And that means facilitating data exchange between different sector actors, but also with citizens and with consumers. So the agency is I think, in a unique position, a unique opportunity, because we are a central, neutral, non-commercial body. So we're there to support the sector, as Joseph said, and to support the citizens in this regard. And we built our strategy around the concept of FAIR, so findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable data. And we are in the process of switching the way we see at least our internal data to support those key elements. And I won't go into the detail of all of those, but you can see there the examples that we talk about. But essentially, we need to make our data visible, to allow others to connect to that data without the need for expensive APIs, but to really to publish where we are. And that will also involve working with sector representatives to build a common understanding of concepts, so that we are talking the same language. And when we exchange data, we can be sure that we're developing a system that delivers high quality, reliable data for the users there. And we can see from the bottom some of the areas we are already working with the sector on: route compatibility, tool check, route book, supporting capacity management, supporting investment planning, 10T, and indeed even internally the efficiency of some of our own processes, and for those for applicants, allowing a smarter use of the tools, exploiting the data we already have. That's in line with a wider EU strategy of creating EU mobility data spaces alongside other data spaces to publicly share that information. A key element of that and the success of that will be the use of open web semantic standards that really allows people to connect and build their systems and to ingest our data effectively. Maybe next slide. So just some of the changes we're doing internally. You may know that we started piloting, looking at connecting two sets of data that we had in-house for the route compatibility check, and that led to the development of a knowledge graph, and that clearly is now the direction in which we're moving with all our databases. So we will be migrating to an extendable single knowledge graph, and in doing that we'll separate the applications from the data, and I think that means that, so for users, you might still be using a tool that's called RINF or eRail or ERA-TV or OSS, but the data supporting that is going to come from our knowledge graph behind that. And it will also allow consumers who wish to do so or are able to do so to directly connect to the knowledge graph and build their own systems on that reliable single source of data. So that's some of the technology changes we'll be working with you all on in 2023 and beyond. And then if I come just to my last slide, Cyril, on the changes in the organization. So to support that, first of all, we're grateful to the management board for their strong support. We had a champion of one of the board members supporting this work, and that's proved very, very helpful in guiding us. So they've adopted our ICT strategy, which talks about being a data-centric organization, and a data roadmap, which sets out a little bit this approach for the knowledge graph. And that's important for us to have that strong central support at the heart of our work. And that clearly, as I said, sets out the fact that we are rethinking the way we work with data. We're rethinking the way we structure our systems internally to become data-centric. And then just to help with that push a little bit and to coordinate a little bit internally, we've created this operational data unit. So I'm grateful to the executive director for taking this initiative and giving me the opportunity to work with this team. And we'll bring together the work of the registers team, the TAF-TAP teams, and the interoperable data work that was already in the former executive office unit together. And those individuals will be driving that work in 2023. So we look forward to an exciting year with everyone. And with that, I pass back to Cyrielle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. And indeed, we are looking forward to what's going on. We'll now move to the second part of this webinar. And without further ado, I will now give the floor to Torben, Holvad and Francesco Rotoli, both working in the brand new Monitoring Analysis Research and Stakeholders, yes, MARS, unit in the agency to comment the report Cross-Border Rail Transport Potential published last December. Please, Torben, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Hope you're all well. As Cyril just mentioned, we will present here the Cross-Border Rail Transport Potential Study, and it was published on the 12th of December on the agency's website. Francesco and I will take you through the main findings of the report. More details are available in the report indeed, and I should also at the outset say thanks to all the contributors, both internally and from external side, for supporting, helping with the study, and we look forward to the follow-up discussion. I will give some introductory remarks, and then Francesco will cover the details, and I will make some and I will also make some concluding remarks at the end of the presentation. So if we go to the next slide, I think this is already, and please continue. So yeah, with all the objectives. So the slide cover the purpose, and the study indeed consider the growth potential of cross-border rail traffic from linked to a further removal of technical and operational barriers. This should indeed, as was also said in the beginning, should be seen as part of the context of the urgent priority for decarbonization to address the climate crisis, where change indeed is needed in the short term, and then to follow up and to ensure a more sustainable transport system. I should also highlight here importance of cross-border regions. The study is about cross-border regions. 30% of the EU population are living in border regions, and some 2 million commuters are taking cross-border trips each day. Not all of them today by rail, but I think the studies can be seen as one of the elements that can support that in the future. So in terms of the steps that has been taken, the objectives in the study, first of all, we try to develop the understanding of cross-border rail transport and mapping, both in terms of the barriers, both for freight and for passenger. What are the considerations on current and potential transport demand in the future? It looks at concrete case studies, 2 for passenger, 2 for freight. And then we also try to see from the case studies, how can we extrapolate to more general findings and to deliver broader recommendations. So that's in terms of the purpose and the steps. I'll now talk at the next slide, brief about the activities and the work carried out, covering both passenger and freight. As I mentioned at the start, cross-border rail transport is analyzed through 2 case studies, Innsbruck-Brennero, Austria-Italy, and another case study is between Bulgaria and Romania, between Rusa and Giorgio. For the passenger transport, we look at 2 case studies again, Vienna-Győr connection and the Berlin-Kostrin connection. We also look in the study on cross-border international high-speed rail service, and as well as also touching on the issue of night trains. I should mention here also at the outset that in terms of looking at the technical and operational barriers, that in the case of the freight transport, we take a quantitative approach. We were able to look at quantitative elements for the analysis of time losses at border sections, whereas for the passenger case studies, we take more a qualitative look at the 2 case studies. And I think that's all on for that slide, and we can go to the next slide, which I think summarizes the findings. Yes, if you continue. So what we find here is first of all high potential for time savings at cross-border sections by solving in the short term over the coming years the technical and operational issues. And we can also see we can also derive some recommendations, both in terms of further cleaning and reduction of the national rules and further harmonization as part of the revision of the technical specification for interoperability and really moving towards the single European rail area. And I think here I would like to highlight 3 things first, as before handing over to Francesco. First of all, this is really about potential. There is a potential. This is possible to improve cross-border traffic by addressing the barriers. That's the first point. The other point is in terms of the study itself that we undertook. It is concrete. It looks at 4 case studies, and it's factual. So we really try to build evidence regarding what are the barriers across Europe for cross-border traffic. Thank you. And I'll pass now the floor to Francesco.
Thanks a lot, Torben, and good afternoon to everyone. I will try to go a bit through the case studies, showing the main outcomes. Of course, more details are in the report, as Torben was mentioning. If we can present all the data on the first slide. We will start with the first freight case studies. We analyzed 2 case studies for the freight transport and 2 for the passenger. For the freight case studies, we have more quantitative analysis. Also, thanks to the issue logbook prepared for DG Move. So the study that presents a lot of information and analysis, and we went through those information, trying also to further, let's say, update or add some elements, some information. Here, for example, in this table, what we can see is the list of the issues that were identified, of technical and operational barrier identified for the section Brenner-Innsbruck between Austria and Italy. With possible time savings for all the the trains at least of 50 minutes per train. Here we can see that there are several columns. Some are referring to the number of trains that are concerned. And what is important is the third column, which is the time lost per train. So we were focusing on technical operational barrier falling under the remit of the agency, and for which we were trying to evaluate mainly the impact in terms of time lost. Then there are also some consideration on the cost per train, but the main focus was really on the time lost for each of the technical barrier. From the list, we can see that we have several issues. They are all described in detail in the report. For example, we have train braking rules and documents, technical checks at the border station. We reported also the numbering from the issue logbook. In particular, for these first two issues related to national rules, different national rules in different member states requiring, for example, different braking sheets on performance or calculation, but also different technical checks, safety checks at departure or arrival. What we can mention at least, what we can mention in particular for the Brenner-Innsbruck is that we would like to remind the recent acceptable means of compliance on checks and tests before departure, including brakes and checks during operation, which were published on the ERA website by ERA recently, and which are analyzed and considered deeply within the activities of the Brenner Corridor platform. So it is possible that possible solutions, let's say, for these issues are already under analysis. So what I want to highlight is that these kind of issues are present, but the agencies, and all the sector are keeping working, trying to solve some of them. So this is the situation as when we speak. So at the moment, let's say, hopefully in the future, some of these issues could be already tackled. While the first freight case study shows anyway possible time savings of 50 minutes, which are significant, but let's say are less significant if we compare them with the second case study. If we can go to the second slide, please, where we can, for the cross-border section Giurgiu-Ruse between Romania and Bulgaria, the analysis identified the possible time savings for all the trains of at least 6 hours. So in this case, we can see that the issues are a bit more numerous. We have, for example, some issues related to a working handbrake, national rules requiring a working handbrake in the last wagon in Romania, or a national rule forbidding the use of 6 axle wagons. But beside, let's say, the number of issues, it is also interesting to notice that, for example, problems related to technical check at border station are much higher, and we have a time loss of at least around 6 hours. In Romania, for example, we have national rules requiring check of wagons every 350 kilometers, or complete checks of the train at arrival or departure if there is a long stop in the station. So this kind of issues in this section are a bit more evident, and let's say the total time of the possible time savings are even higher than the 50 minutes. If you go to the next slide, based on this consideration and on this analysis, we try to evaluate also potential change in demand if we solve these technical and operational barriers for both the sections. So in this case, we were focusing only on the 2 sections, and we were analyzing this potential change in demand mainly based on time elasticity. So on the elasticity, so on the potential change in demand and due to the change in travel time, to the reduction in travel time in this case. So the increase in demand since the time elasticity is negative. From the literature review, we selected possible time elasticity variable between 0.7, minus 0.7 and minus 1. And what this graph represents is the possible change in travel demand based on this value of time elasticity, considering the current travel time or rail freight. So practically, the blue, let's say, graph represents the situation in the Brenner East section, the orange one, the situation for Giurgiu-Ruse, and for travel time of 15 hours, for example, if currently freight is traveling for 15 hours, with the reduction of 15 minutes in the section of Brenner or Innsbruck, we can expect a reduction, an increase in demand between 5 and 7%. For the same travel time of 15 minutes for the section Giurgiu-Ruse, we can expect, since the reduction in travel time can be of 6 hours, solving the technical operational barrier, we can expect an increase a potential demand increase in demand variable between 30 and 40%. So it is quite significant, and something that we would like, we should highlight two elements here. First of all, of course, this analysis is quite rough because it's based only on time elasticity. Here we want to give an idea of the order of magnitude, but these numbers should not be taken as written in the stone, of course. The point is that we want to show that there is high potential, and the high potential is even more evident when we think that we are referring only to a single section, but in reality the freight in their travel will cross more cross-border sections. So the potential increase in demand, the potential reduction in travel time could be even higher. If we go to the next slide, we can also have a look at the passenger case studies. Here we have more qualitative data, especially for the availability of the data, so more qualitative consideration. In particular, we focused on two case studies. One is the Vienna-Győr passenger connection, so the connection between the service between Austria and Hungary. These offer, let's say, it is characterized by good accessibility. In reality, Győr is quite close to Vienna, but also to Bratislava, and it is part of this triangle. Let's say the connection between among of these city has helped a lot the cross-border economy of this region. There are not big issues for the service and the demand. The demand continues to grow. Anyway, there is travel time of varying between 70 and 150 minutes, depending on the number of stops, because there are some regional trains between the two stations, Vienna, Győr, making all the stops, and then there are also long distance trains from Vienna to Budapest, stopping also in Győr, but not making all the stops, where the travel time is shorter. Anyway, the travel time is always good, and it is competitive with the road. Even here, in a quite positive situation, we can notice that it will be possible to reduce by around 10-15 minutes more further, let's say, the travel time by addressing technical barriers, since there is the need at the cross-border section to change the technical parameters of the locomotives due to the different voltage and voltage of the let's say of the railway systems in the two countries. There are some tests in adopting locomotives, traction vehicles able to switch directly from one system to another quickly, but the situation and they are tested, but let's say by reducing further this 10-15 minutes, especially for commuters, this service will be even more competitive and attractive. If we go to the second passenger case study, It is focusing on the connection between Berlin and Kostrin. This is a different connection because it is serving mainly the German network and the surrounding area of Berlin. But then the last stop is in Kostrin, so linking also the German network to the Polish one. Also here, let's say this service contributes to cross-border integration, and the demand is quite high. So there are anyway some obstacles that could be solved. Besides the legal and administrative one, the technical one are related mainly to the availability and to the lack for the moment of rolling stocks which are able to use the standard, the different standards of the two country. And then there are practical obstacles. Well, this obstacle was also evident in the previous one, related to language differences. This is not only for the well, it is mainly for the information also to the client, to the customers, but it is also for communication among of the railway undertaking. If we go to the next, sorry, to the railway operators. If we go to the next slide, then in the report we summarized also some consideration on the high-speed rail services, even if we were not going deeply in detail in the cross-border in the technical operational barriers, also because rail interoperability is often guaranteed by specific rolling stock in the case of high-speed services, but we made especially consideration on the importance and of the competitiveness of high-speed rail services for distances between 100 and 800 kilometers and for rail travel time up to 4 hours, in comparison, of course, with the road and air transport. So even here for high-speed services, we can see the importance of travel time. So the importance of reducing at the minimum possible the time lost for interoperability issues, because travel time is an important factor for choosing rail and so for increasing the modal share. In fact, if we go to the next slide, we can see two figures which clearly, well, these are based, well, especially the one on the left are based on real real cases. So based on some, let's say, high-speed services connections, these graphs were produced, and it shows how for the market share of rail compared to air, based on the travel time. And we can see that for travel time of less than 2 hours, 2 hours and a half, rail is the predominant mode of transport with more than 80% of rail market share. If the travel time goes from 2.5 to 3.5, let's say, still rail is very competitive. For travel time higher and up to 5 hours, rail is less competitive, and then air take over, the air transport take over. The graph on the right instead shows that for distances between 100 and 800 kilometers, rail is competitive compared to air. So these are the let's say graphs showing a bit and confirming what we are seeing. In the let's say in the report there are several other considerations and several other practical examples, so concrete examples showing similar considerations. If we go then to the next slide, before leaving the floor to Torben, I would like to highlight also some limitations in the study. Let's say the study focus on the possible removal of technical interoperability barriers. So we were focusing on the issues falling under the remit of the agency, and especially on the possible quantification of travel time, so of reduction in travel time from these issues. Of course, these are only these are main contributing factors, but they are not the only factors contributing to the modal share. So for sure, we need to solve these issues to have a modal share, but then there is a need for actions and measures there is need for also for other actions and measures, and all together can contribute to a big increase of the modal share. Then let's say we have made an analysis of potential growth in demand based on time elasticity. So we made a rough estimation, which is indicative, but is not fully exhaustive. So more elements like induced demand and also more consideration could be added. But in any case, the idea and the main scope was to give an order of magnitude of the possible improvement. The quantitative analysis is based mainly on the data from on the information also from the issue logbook, further analyzed, confirmed internally and with their colleagues, and also from a literature review. In any case, some of the consideration from the issue logbook and also from some of the consideration that we have done are based on average values at European level. So we were not really making a field campaign or local campaign. So it could be also interesting to have further analysis of this kind of issues for more cross-border section and focusing on the specific situation, trying to get even more detailed local data information. And then what we have already noticed and what also was highlighted already by Josef, by the executive director in his presentation, is that what we are representing is the issue only in one cross-border section. In reality, by solving these kind of issues in all the cross-border section, which an international freight train or passenger train will cross during his journey, will of course even increase the number, the possible time reduction, and so the possible benefit and the possible. This is all from my side. Thanks a lot, and Torben, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Francesco. I'll be fast, just drawing up some very brief conclusions of the study. You have more details in the study, and I think the key point to highlight here is the potential for significant reduction in travel time at cross-border. It involves, from the study's perspective, also further cleaning up of national rules and also closing open points and specific cases in the TSIs, and that is tools that can support the strengthening of the railways competitiveness. That matters, and that matters in the short term. And this is the reason why this is important. We can make changes over the short term and improve rail's competitiveness in cooperation with the sector, and this is linked to a more sustainable transport system. I will stop there. Thanks a lot for your attention, and looking forward to answer any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Torben and Francesco, for this very detailed and instructive presentation. So we've seen that there is a strong potential for time savings for passenger and freight cross-border rail transport if technical and operational issues are solved. So now I'll turn to our speakers, and to start with Bardo Schettini Gherardini. Let me recall our audience that you are the Director Operations at EIM. I'll just recall that your organization is managing more than 50% of the European Union's railway lines. Bardo, from the infrastructure manager's point of view, what are the main obstacles to eliminate the technical and operational issues at borders? And how does the sector, and infrastructure managers in particular, is trying to contributing to lower down those barriers? And then another question, and then I'll give you the floor. What else can and should be done to speed up the process? For example, investments. Please, Bardo, floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the question. Thank you very much also for inviting me to this very interesting workshop. Indeed, we are very supportive of this kind of studies, and I have to also thank you, to thank ERA for making it, because it really highlights real concrete problems where we see it. Now, I mean, of course, your question is very broad, so I will try to summarize a little bit the thoughts into maybe 3 areas, because I do think that while the study clearly shows us that there is no one size fits all, because each country has its own problems, or let's say the border between 2 countries, they have their own problems. Also the lines, they have their own problems that have to be, let's say, solved. There are still, I think, 3 main areas where actually we have obstacles on which we have to work all together to eliminate. And the first one, of course, is a kind of cultural and administrative habits that we have in different countries that, of course, are difficult to change and takes time. I'm thinking about, you know, we talk about real-time communication, but also, you know, in the issues of language that you also mentioned in your study. These are things, of course, that have a cultural history and that cannot be changed overnight. But also, you know, administrative stuff like, you know, the wagon checks that, again, that you also mentioned in your study at border station. And these, again, are, let's say, administrative habits that somehow have to be tackled at national level. There are also other, I would call them structural difficulties or structural barriers to interoperability that we have to overcome together. Again, we talk about national legacies, long-standing heritage, if I may call them in this way, that are really difficult to change and requires, I mean, lots of efforts and investment as well. I'm thinking about, for instance, the electrification standards that, again, you also mentioned in your study. In this case, of course, I mean, to have an harmonized approach will require quite a lot of effort from many member states. But also, I mean, the deployment of new technologies, of new solutions, like, for instance, you know, the increase of train capacity when we talk about that, or heavier or longer trains. This is clearly an advantage for freight, but at the same time, you know, we have to see how to adapt the network, the rail network, the rail infrastructure, you know, to make it possible. And it is not always possible to do it in the short run. So clearly, these are, you know, 2 main areas where I think, in any case, I mean, the work with ERA and the close collaboration with ERA is absolutely essential. But there is a third one, which goes beyond also ERA, which is actually financing. And this also leads me maybe to the second part of your questions, because clearly here we need to have, or probably we should have, a kind of pact of engagement, not only between or among the sector and ERA, but also maybe between member states at European level, and also between let's say, national authorities and infrastructure managers at national level, to make sure that we have a kind of shared vision on the priorities, on where are the bottlenecks, and actually to drive also investments over there. And this, my last comment, is about really to make available the necessary budget to handle those investments, so that we can really tackle those bottlenecks in a very efficient way from both sides of the let's say, of the borders among the different member states. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bardo. Thank you very much for these answers. I would like now to ask the opinion of CER, the Community of European Railway and Infrastructure Companies. Enno Wiebe, let me recall our audience that you are the technical director of CER, and that your organization represents around 70 railway undertakings and infrastructure managers. So, Enno, we've seen that solving cross-border issues is one of the crucial factors to achieve the modal shares targets for rail. So 2 questions for you. The first one is, how important for the sector is it to increase the modal share of cross-border rail traffic across Europe? And how important is it to act quickly? And the second question, which measures are already in place and which further concrete actions would be beneficial to facilitate this modal shift, for example, investments for improving infrastructure and customers' experience? Please, Enno, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the question. As you are asking this question to a representative of a business organization, I can actually be very quick. It's of utmost importance, actually, because we are a business organization, and with the business we are doing here, we want to earn money. That is what is behind this business. But I would like to remind you of the slide that Josef showed in the very beginning. That was the modal shift, the target and reality, or I would actually call it targets versus the reality. And we saw the target of 30% of modal share. This is definitely our target. This is what we are striving for. But the reality looks a little bit different. I don't want anybody to show this slide because it's quite shocking. And if the continues go, or the figures continue to go down, then this is more a question of survival in the end. And this is actually what I don't want to discuss at the next webinar on this topic. I would prefer to discuss that the figures are going up, that we are striving towards this ambitious target. And this is definitely what we want to reach in terms of the greening of surface transport. But I have to openly say it as well in terms of earning money with railways, because that's a business we are running. And why is it so important, or how important is it for us? I think the question is actually to ourselves. So in what kind of Europe do we want to live in the future? What is this Europe going to look like? And I think we should see this in a bigger picture of a sustainable life. And I would like to ask or invite everybody to ask the question to themselves: what are we doing to increase this modal share for railways, both perhaps in terms of passenger and freight? I think it's a very personal question, and let us reflect a little bit about the use of cars, the use of trucks, the use of airplanes for your holiday trip. Let's reflect about strawberries for Christmas, toilet paper purchased on Amazon, all these weird things we are doing at the moment, and that is all part, I think, of the problem. And actually, I would like to say, let's not look at the Commission, let's not look at the agency, because we are part of the solution here as well. And this is why it is so important. And the question, the bigger picture again, is in what kind of Europe do we want to live in future? And I think we have a common understanding that this should be a green future, a green Europe that is worth to live in. We all have our different roles and responsibilities. The Commission, the agency, the agency's management board, Clio mentioned it already, and the sector as well. And the sector has some ideas to tackle this. For us, it is, for example, passenger transport, to increase cross-European train services. But again, I invite you to reflect, what is your holiday planning for 2023? Is the railways part of your holiday planning, for example? Will you help this year to change this modal share in terms of using high-speed trains to your holiday destination, an intercity to go to work, or a night train perhaps to do your weekend trip instead of a cheap flight coupon? Freight services, we have to rethink, of course, a little bit our economy, but I think in times of COVID and the energy crisis, we have started that discussion. An infrastructure focus, we want to deliver a very ambitious and well-working trans-European infrastructure network. You asked me the question about quickly. Well, I don't know if quickly necessarily appears in my railway dictionary, but it is the moment to act, it's the moment to change, and I think it is the moment to move forward. There are very, let me say, huge potentials at the moment. There is a positive spirit to move back to railways, to bring railways back to our daily lives as well. And I think that's, again, a very personal question. I would like to mention the agency's activities here. Josef mentioned it, the TSI revision, but for cross-border, activities, let me just highlight the long-standing discussion on reflective rear end signals for freight trains. 10 years of discussion. So now you're asking me again the question about being quick. We have to be quicker. We have to harmonize more at European level. Positive elements are the logbook of the Commission, the greening freight package. Here we have to think about train drivers. There is so much on the table at the moment. We have to put bits and pieces together. There is a lot of good initiatives on the side of the Commission, on the side of the agency. The agency is doing a very good job, but I think it's up to all of us, because we all play our role here in this modal shift, and it's all up to all of us actually to make a better and a greener future. We will do our share as the sector. We will of course go for more implementation, but we have to talk about financing and funding. We have to talk about accelerated ERTMS deployment, about migration. But let me close this this intervention, because it is of course very high level, with this very personal comment. Let us perhaps personally think what we can do, each of us, for improving railways, for appreciating railways, for bringing value to railways, by considering railways, the use of railways in our daily lives. And I think this is actually the starting point. And perhaps when next time you order something online, when you do your travel booking, perhaps that is something you can take into account, because I think that would be the best starting point to make this railway system work better in future.
Thank you very much, Enno. Thank you very much for being with us today. So we are already running a little bit late, but we received several questions in the chat addressed to Chris Carr. So I recall that you are the head of the new operational and data unit in the agency, and mainly the several questions were related to the impact on the OSS, the impact of this new approach, this new data-centered approach on the OSS. Is there a need for cybersecurity expertise? Will there be any impact on that? Please, Chris, what can you reply to that?
So I think with there are several good questions in the chat, but the OSS one, I think the first thing I would say is OSS is clearly an essential and functioning tool. So we want to ensure that that tool is always there for the applicant, and that makes us nervous about touching it. Well, along the lines of, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But I think there are some natural improvements we can make in the medium to longer term. So the first is, as we digitize the other information in our registers, I think we'll be able to have a higher level of digitization of the OSS data, and that will allow a greater level of automation, which will make it easier for applicants, but also assessors. And then I think there's the logical extension to the question of registration. So at the moment, of course, when a vehicle is authorized, it still needs to be registered before you can use that vehicle. And when you look at the figures that Josef showed in terms of the number of vehicles now the agency is authorizing at a European level, we're still requiring applicants to go and find a national registration body to then register their vehicle. It would be a natural and obvious extension that you get your authorization and your vehicle registration at the same time. And I think that the tools we're starting to work on would allow us to do that in an efficient way, I think. So that's something that we are interested in looking at in the longer term. In the shorter term, we can make improvements to the experience that applicants have with the OSS, because, as you know, there is still often the case of people having to re-input data that they put in another register, and it would be good, I think, if we can avoid that. So we can we're working on this kind of e-government principle of once only. So if the data exists somewhere, if the applicant has already put the data somewhere, let's not ask them to copy it again into another tool for a slightly different purpose. But that will need some careful handling and some careful work with the the sector and the NSAs. What we want to avoid, of course, is any damage or interruption to the service. That's essential. We need that tool is used on a daily basis, so it has to be available. So we'll need to do some careful migration, I think, of that. I don't know if that answers the question.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think it does. And if we receive further questions later on, of course, we will publish the answers on the website. Before we close this webinar, I would like to give back the floor to Josef for a final closing word. Please, Josef, floor is yours.
Many thanks, Cyril, and thank you for all contributors, Clio, Chris, Torben, Francesco, Bardo, and Enno. I believe it has been a lively webinar. It has set the right tone for kicking off the activities in 23. Two key messages. Firstly, we need to improve cross-border services in order to progress on the modal shift, because that's the crux of the problem. This is where rail is clearly behind the other modes of transport. Second, we need to progress on the digitalization of the railway sector, and what we are doing with the new operational data unit should provide the single source of reliable data. And as all of us have stated over this webinar, the importance is working together in the railway sector and making sure that together we move rail forward. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you for all the participants who have left questions, and we will respond to all the questions in due time. Thank you very much, and see you at our next webinar.
Thank you very much, Josef. Let me indeed thank warmly all of our speakers and the colleagues involved in the preparation of this event. Thank you for your attendance and participation. Dear attendees, you were quite a lot today. Before you go, we would be very happy, as usual, to receive your feedback and/or further questions on this webinar via the QR code you're seeing right now on the screen. We look forward to meeting you again at our upcoming webinars, the next one being on the 16th of February. It's about cybersecurity. In the meantime, and in any case, if you would like to stay updated on our activities, you can sign into our database by selecting the button Login on our website page. And in any time, you can follow us on our social media accounts, Twitter and LinkedIn. Thank you very much for participating. Again, I wish you a very happy new year, and in the shorter term, a very pleasant lunch and afternoon. Take care.